Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We're so glad to welcome you as part of our community tonight. Please note that this webinar is being recorded and distributed live stream. By entering this virtual meeting room, you give your consent to be recorded and distributed by Simeon Morrow Public Speaking and Presentations and other third parties. If you prefer to not be recorded, please turn off your camera and microphone and/or go to the Facebook Live video feed, the link to which I'll now place in the chat room. For a better experience, please turn off your microphone and set your video to gallery view. Tonight, our featured guest is Julio Mendívil, University Professor for Ethnomusicology at the University of Vienna. Professor Mendívil is joined by Professor Lino Rivera of St. Mary's College of California. Professor Mendívil, welcome.
Thank you very much, Mr. Morrow, for this invitation. I'm very happy to be here and to share with your guest this evening.
So, Professor Mendívil, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background?
Oh, it is always really difficult to say where you are because I am not really sure if I know who I am, but I try to give some information about my person. I am a Peruvian ethnomusicologist based in Vienna, in Austria. I studied ethnomusicology in Germany in the 90s, and then I moved to Austria in order to assume the chair for ethnomusicology at the University in Vienna. My regional focus in ethnomusicology is the music from the Andes. I work on music genres like huayno and yaraví and other popular music styles from Peru, and also on Schlager music from Germany. My second regional focus is Germany and Austria, and I wrote a book about the German Schlager music and try to research also in this field. Music is always a social thing, and for this reason, my perspective in music study is an intersectional perspective, and I try to combine musical issues with social and historical and also racial issues which are present in the music practices.
So, Professor Mendívil, can you tell us a little bit about how you got into ethnomusicology? If I understand correctly, you come from Lima, Peru, I believe, and you had an upbringing in classical music, and then you got into rock music, I think, something like that. And then tell us if that's right or not, and about how you got so interested then in music of the Andes, and then ultimately German Schlager music.
I come from Lima, and I grew up in Lima, and the music I heard in my young time was progressive rock, and also the classical music, which we learned at the school, or for example at the conservatorium in Lima. But I would say due to the political situation in Peru, I began to take interest in music from the minorities of my country. And then I met Chalena Vázquez, a very central figure for the ethnomusicology in Peru, and she offered to me to work with her. as assistant research, as research assistant, and then I became fascinated with ethnomusicology and with field work and with the contact with the people, with contact with the musicians on the field. I noticed immediately that I want to become an ethnomusicologist. Then I moved to Germany, and because Peru doesn't offer the possibility to study ethnomusicology, and for this reason I went to Germany in order to study ethnomusicology there. And like every ethnomusicologist, I noticed that the traditional and popular music from Germany was very strange for me, and ethnomusicologists like strange things, and I began to deal with Schlager music there.
Professor Mendívil, could you tell us a little bit now about what ethnomusicology is exactly?
Yeah, ethnomusicology is a field of musicology or music studies. I would say that our perspective is to study music as culture. When I say we study music as culture, I mean that music is not only an auditive structure, but more than sounds, music is also behavior, and music is also concepts about music. And for this reason, we need to take contact with the people who play music. We can hear music, we can see the behavior, but we cannot see the concepts. We cannot hear the concepts. And for that reason, we have to speak with the people and ask them what they are doing. And we try to understand other music cultures. And I would say the ethnomusicology has a long tradition as cultural relativist field in musicology. Many persons think that ethnomusicology is a field of musicology responsible for non-Western music, but this is not true. We work with every kind of music around the world. The difference is that, for example, historical musicologists work with historical sources, systematic musicologists work in labor, and we work using ethnographic methods in order to ask people what are they doing by musicking, what are they doing by consuming music.
So is ethnomusicology a branch of sociology?
I would say we are a mixture from social and humanities, social science and humanities, because many aspects in ethnomusicology has to do with philosophy of music. We are all the time wondering what is music. We try to describe what people do with music, and we notice that depending on the culture, music could be very different things. Many things that are music for example, for the people from the Andes, is not music for Europeans. And on the other hand, things that are music for us is not music for other cultures. For example, I remember here in the German-speaking area in Europe, we have a lot of Turkish people, and they pray, and this kind of prayer they use sounds for us like a chant, but they don't sing. and they say we are praying and not singing. And I think it is very important for us to discuss what we understand when we speak about music, how we imagine music and how we conceptualize music. And this is different depending on the culture.
So could you tell us a little bit about your research experience in Colombia? I think you were writing your doctoral dissertation and you were researching some tribes in an area far in some jungle in Colombia. Could you tell us a little bit about that and then maybe connect that with your work in Germany where you were meeting the Schlager musicians?
Okay, I try. I went 2000 to Colombia in order to research a musical instrument. This is a flute, which is made from this school of Adir. And I went to the Sicuani people in Los Llanos, not in the jungle, but in a very dry zone from Colombia. I was there for 3 months and working with Sicuani indigenous people concerning the rituals and the meaning of this instrument in Colombia. But I try to make a comparison of the musical issues there with this instrument with archaeological data I had about this instrument from the Andes before the conquest of the Spaniards in the pre-Hispanic era in the Andes. And I try to use the information, the current information about the instrument in order to understand the old sources I had, and but at the end, I began to do both things, to use the old sources in order to understand the current practices and to use the current information in order to understand the old sources in a dialogical or dialectical dialogue between the sources. And after this research, my professor recommended me to change the regional focus. This is very important for your career in Germany or in the German-speaking area. When you apply for a position, normally the institutes are looking for people who has 2 regional focuses. And for this reason, I changed the culture, what I say, and I began to look for a musical genre which I can research, and I found very interesting that Schlager music is a very popular music in Germany, but this is a kind of music which a very low social status. Many people consume Schlager music, but Schlager music has status as music for a very simple person, for non well-educated persons. And I found very interesting to see how the society, the German society, deal with that, with a music which say we are German music, but my environment, my intellectual environment, rejected this kind of music because it was a little bit nationalist or too German for many people. It's interesting that the German intellectuality don't want to be German and rejected a music which tried to be German. And I found this situation very interesting for a dissertation. And for this reason, I selected the German music as my topic for research.
Okay. So now we get into our first roundtable, but as a preparation, I'd like to kind of ask you about this minority idea that you began with, that you started ethnomusicology in Peru, researching minorities and their music. And so it seems to me, I remember at Vienna hearing a lecture of yours where you talked about the Spanish conquest and how they degraded the masculinity of the native people. And they did this in order to show their dominance, their superiority. And I gather that that is a very, very important issue to you, and that fascinates you and drives your work. So I'm interested to know about about this issue of being kind of someone outside of the society and looking at that, and how you experienced that first there in Colombia as a metropolitan person from Lima going to some tribe, and then in Germany as a foreigner, a Latin American person, kind of doing the opposite of what the 19th century Europeans did.
I'm not sure if the first time I experienced this feeling to be outside of culture was in Colombia. I would say the first time I noticed I am an outsider was in Peru, because I didn't identify myself with the official culture of my country, and I didn't identify myself with my cultural environment. I was always interested in other cultures. I was always interested in looking for new things for me and for my life. And I would say that I was looking all the time for being apart from the little world in which I grew up. And for this reason, for me was a new experience to be in Europe, because I didn't find a reason why I don't feel comfortable with my own culture, and why I am a foreign person in my country. But in Germany, for me, was natural to be the other, to be the outsider, because I am not German, you know. And for this reason, I would say that to be part of a culture or not is a thing which doesn't depend on your nationality, but it depends on your interest. How do you feel in this world? And which, I would say, which ideas do you have about human beings and humanity at all? You know, I would say that it, of course, it's not the same to live in a country in which you have more rights. I am Peruvian and I have a lot of rights as Peruvian, and this is a difference. But this kind of alienation which I felt in Peru, I feel here too. But for me, it is very logic to feel outside from the society here. And for me, it's I would say a good feeling to know, okay, I am not Austrian, and for this reason I can differ in my behavior sometimes, or I can speak with, for example, with an accent. What I do when I speak German, I think I have a strong accent as Peruvian, and And this kind of experience makes sense for me to be the other, you know?
Okay, so this brings us to our first roundtable. This is about an open letter on racism in music studies, especially ethnomusicology and music education, an open letter from 2020 by Danielle Brown. I'm going to put this up on the screen. It's available for everybody to see. You can find it. There it is. I will put it in the chat room in a second. So Daniela Brown was, I believe, she was an assistant professor of music history and cultures at Syracuse University. She's a Black woman, and she ended up resigning her position because she felt that, I believe, she was not respected, not in Syracuse, but at Syracuse University, and more particularly among the music historians. So that is our first roundtable. Tell us, when I approached you about doing a show, Professor Mendívil, you told me, yes, let's do it, and let's do it about this open letter by Daniela Brown. Can you tell us about your reaction when you read this and why you would like to discuss it tonight?
Yeah, a very important thing to say is that ethnomusicology was always a progressive field in musicology. We felt all the time the hippies from musicology, I would say, and this open letter shown that ethnomusicology remains a white frame for non-white people in ethnomusicology. The things Daniel Brown describes in this open letter, I know, and I have experienced many similar things in my career in Germany and also in Latin America. And for me, it was very interesting to notice that ethnomusicologist was surprised from such a letter, because we feel ourselves as very progressive persons, but in the fact we are also reproducing racist structures and forms of discrimination in our discipline. And it is always easier to say, no, you are interpreting things in a wrong way, as to accept that we unaware reproduce racist structures.
So could you tell us a little bit about these racist structures, and what does this white frame mean? What does, like you said, why was this letter surprising to ethnomusicologists?
I tried to explain it with a short story. When I was a visiting professor at the university in Cologne in Germany, I went to the cafe from the university, and middle of the way, a person spoke to me and asked me if I am a worker of the university, if I am the portier of the university, and for me, it was a very clear moment from discrimination, because he was saying me that a person like me is not able to be professor there, so that's the expectation that Germans has. You know, when they imagine a professor for ethnomusicology, they imagine a white person, a person with some characteristic, some racial characteristic, and a person which belongs to a specific cultural group, you know. And this kind of of inquiry is naive on the one hand. On the other hand, is really an act of discrimination. It's saying you don't belong you don't belong to this culture. You don't belong to this circle of people. You belong on the other side. You have to be studied and not to study in ethnomusicology. For me, that was a very significant moment to notice. For the ethnomusicologist or for the people from the German academia, I am an informant, or I could be an informant, but not a professor. And I think it is a good example how we reproduce racist structures without wanting to do that. I think this is a very important point. I know this person wanted or didn't want to discriminate my person, but in the fact he was saying you don't have the appearance of a German professor. You don't belong to this field.
And Professor Mendívil, so that I imagine is not exclusive to majorities, to a white majority in Germany, but also to minorities who see other people and they think, you are not that or you are that. Is that, I mean, is this a problem that can be solved, or what does it mean on a larger level? Why is it this of importance? Because it seems to me that the idea of looking and seeing appearances that are not true is a very, very old story in human history. So how is this of relevance today?
I would say that this is very important to be aware that we have different appearances. And I would say this is very important to know that we have cultural differences too. The problem for me is that we have to learn to live with differences, and we have to be free from imaginations we have about cultural or intellectual capacities in relation to our skin or our appearance. My appearance says nothing about my intellectual capacities. My intellectual capacities are not does not depend on my appearance, but of my capacities, of my study or my experience in life. And for this reason, I think this is very important to learn to avoid such kind of stereotypes. We have a lot of stereotypes which are racialized. Like, for example, many persons in Peru would say Afro-Peruvian people are very good for playing rhythm, and all this kind of prejudice are very dangerous, because they are the basic of discriminations behavior.
And with that, I'd like to bring in Professor Lino Rivera of St. Mary's College of California. Lino?
Mm-hmm. Yes, Professor Mendívil, thank you very much for being here. Now, I have a question with regards to the intellectual community. From your experience, how does the intellectual or the university, the academia environment promote racism? Does that mean that only indigenous people can study the particular culture of a certain particular culture, and white people cannot study it just because they are white? So those are basically two questions. How does academia portray this racism? And number two, can only people of color study the indigenous music and not white people?
So here in the German-speaking area, there is a lot of structures which makes a difference between German-speaking persons and not German-speaking person. I would say that for something like me, who is not a native speaker, it's very difficult to get a chair in a university. If you say, for example, in departments like Spanish philology or Portuguese philology, the majority of our colleagues comes from Germany or from England or from Austria, and there is a prejudice concerning the competences of non-native speakers. Many persons think we cannot communicate with our studies in a second language because we are not native speaker, and for this reason, it is very difficult to get a share. And I was confronted many times with such questions like, what do you do if you have to write a letter without errors in German? What I say, I can look for help for that. You know, this is not a problem. And I would say many persons, for example, many colleagues from Germany, they communicate with other communities in English, and this is not the native language of the German persons, but they don't reflect about that. They feel able to communicate in a second language, but they don't feel or they don't think that we are able to do that in a right way. I think this is a very typical form to reproduce stereotypes and racist structures in the academia here in Germany or in the German-speaking area. Concerning to the second question, here is on the contrary, indigenous people have or are I would say indigenous people have seen as persons who have not to study music, but to do music. We play music, but we don't study music, you know? As we are, many colleagues see us as informants, as persons who are interested for research only as a source, you know, but not as researchers. And when we begin to research music, many colleagues here think we are able only to write about our own culture. And for this reason, for example, I come from Latin America, and every time someone needs some information about a Latin American country, this colleague calls me, say, you come from Peru, you know something about music from Paraguay. And this is not true. I am a specialist in music from the Andes. I am not obligated to know the music from Paraguay because I come from Latin America. And nobody expects that you knows the music from I don't know, from Canada if you comes from the USA, you know. But there is this prejudice here that we are responsible for a cultural area, and we are able, if we research, only to research in our our own culture. On the other hand, colleagues from Germany and from Austria feel able to work on every culture around the world. They are able to write about every culture without problem. They can understand every culture, but we are not able to do that. We can speak only about our own culture. And for this reason, I decided to turn out the situation in the ethnology or in the ethnomusicology. And I would say, if you let me be a little bit ironic, to say that I took the Germans to be my indigenous people. I was the observer, and he were the observant, and for me it was very interesting experience to change this tradition in the ethnomusicology. White people research about non-white people, and I do, on the contrary, I research as non-white people on white people.
Okay, so just a follow-up then, just to clarify the second question. Do you think that only indigenous people of their own culture should do the research? Because if another person like a white person would research on something that is not their own culture, we think of that as something like privileged. So do you think that only indigenous people should learn and write about their own culture?
No, I don't think so. I don't agree with this idea. I think if we reflect about our position as researcher, as white or non-white researcher, I think we can research about every kind of music. And for me, the problem is when white people study non-white people and speak for us. I think this is the problem. But I think every person has the right to research what he or she wants,
Yes. Okay. And then I have another question. How is your research about the Schlagermusik of Germany received? How did the Germans receive your studies?
Yeah, I would say in a positive way, because as non-German, I didn't have prejudice concerning this music. And for this reason, my view and my perspective was very empathic. And I tried to be fair, like every ethnomusicologist tries. And I tried to understand many things and to explain many things about this music which are misunderstood in the German society. And for this reason, I would say my book was, I know many reviews, and all reviews I know were positive. And it was, I would say, a very important aspect in order to position myself in the German-speaking area as an ethnomusicologist. Yeah, that I reached with this book, yeah, I would say kind of privileged position in the German-speaking ethnomusicology. Yeah.
Professor Mendívil, so perhaps returning to our roundtable about Daniela Brown, I'm not sure if you know her personally or not, but she resigned her position and said, I can't work in this, in such an environment. Would you consider your work with the Schlagermusik, which I believe would be the same similar to country music in the United States of America. Would you consider that kind of research, like you said, turning the focus, would that be a kind of solution to this frame that you're saying? Would such a thing, does that help people change their stereotypes?
I don't like to give recipes, because I don't know if I have a solution for a problem. I can only say my way was in this way, and it functioned for me, but I don't know. I don't like to transport the solution in a case to other cases or to other environments, because the context is a different one, and because societies could be similar, but at the same time very different, and for this reason, I cannot say what is the solution for racial problems in other countries or in the academia in the USA, but I can say that we have to fight against discrimination and against stereotypes. It helps to confront with the problems and with forms of discrimination. Behind that, I avoid to offer solutions which I know, which I cannot approve before I offer them.
That sounds very scholarly. Professor Mendívil, let's take a look at our next roundtable, which is about Philip A. Ewell's music theory and the white racial frame. So Philip A. Ewell, also an African-American, is a music theory, professor of music theory. And in his article, he writes about how the music theory community for years, if not decades, has tried to include more people of color, people other than the white people inside the white racial frame, and that they've not succeeded, that he's only one of two Black professors, I believe, in the music theory world in the United States. And he says that the most famous music theorist that they study, Heinrich Schenker, was an unrepenting racist, and that his racial theories have been cleansed, they've been removed, at least from his writings in all of the classes he teaches. And he says that's not okay. So could you tell us a little bit about this article and why you chose to discuss it tonight?
I think that Ewell chose as a very important point of the problem concerning racism in musicology. There is a lot of persons, and there is a lot of personalities in our field which, aware or unaware, reproduce racism. And for this reason, it's very important to show that many persons do that in a very open way, like Schenker. And it's very interesting to notice that Schenker wrote without problem about differences in races and a lot of very discriminating things concerning other cultures, but the musicology tried to conceal that, to show only the positive aspects of his writings, and this is very common, and I think it has to do with a completely false idea about racism. When we think about racism, we think racists are bad people. And I would say that this is not true. Racism is a very common issue. And I would say that white people and people of color, we all reproduce racism in many ways. And this is not because we are bad persons, but it is because the structures in the society conduct us in such discriminating acts, you know? And I would say that such articles like this one by Ewell show us how important it is to name things, you know, to show to the problems and to discuss about persons which has a big influence in field, and how we defend them from such problematic like racism, you know? And I think this is a very important issue to discuss about racism in musicology, and to discuss about personalities which reproduce in an open way or a very evident way that they have had racist ideas. I think this is a very important point at the moment to confront such ideas which are, I would say, latent in the field, but nobody speak about that. And for this reason, I think it's a really, really important work which Ewell is doing at the moment in the USA. He was very hard criticized by many colleagues, and I think we need more articles like this.
So Philipp Ewell, in other words, he's taking the stereotypes and he's saying, listen, like you said about turning the object of investigation, of research from indigenous people to German people. And he's turning the spotlight and saying, listen, this in our music theory, academia, Black people are really, their voices are not included, just like you were saying about Latin American people.
He makes a comparison between hierarchies in races and hierarchies in systems in musicology. He shows how Schenker, the same idea of hierarchy used in order to explain music and to classify music cultures. And for this reason, I think it is very important to notice how the person works, how the person writes about the other, and how ideas are undermined the other aspects of the work from Schenker. I don't think that Schenker was a negative person, but he reproduced in many ways racist ideas, and these ideas influenced his work. And this is very important to remark that, to say that, to teach that for new musicologists, you know?
And Professor Mendívil, is it fair to say that the man who asked you if you were the concierge at the University of Cologne, that he was reproducing even ideas that go back to Schenker? Is that fair to say?
I don't think so. I don't agree with this proposition. I would say he was reproducing ideas which are present in the German society, not because Schenker, but because, or due to the long tradition of racism in the German society. As he was reproducing the racism you find every day in the German-speaking area as non-white person. I have the privilege to have a chair, and when I stay in the front of the students, I know that I have a power position, but this power position disappears immediately when I go to the street. And then I am also a migrant, I'm a minority, I am a Peruvian, and not the professor at university, you know. And I think this was the structure which I was confronted in this situation, in this history I told you.
Professor Mendívil also, he doesn't shy away from talking about politics. He says that when the first African-American president of the United States was elected, that this conversation was somehow a little bit muted, was much less present. But then with the election of the next president, Donald Trump, that all of these ideas came out very, very strongly. So my question is, how far away from politics is the field of ethnomusicology and music theory?
I am not sure if we are able to think or to speak about ethnomusicology without politics. I don't think so. I think ethnomusicology see music as social field, and the social field is always a political one. And for this reason, it's impossible for me to speak about ethnomusicology without considering political issues. For example, we all use music in order to construct our body identity, our gender identity, and this is at the moment a very political issue in our societies. For example, in Peru, where there's a lot of homophobic positions, I think it is very important to notice this social aspect of music, and I think that the only possibility that the musicology has to survive in a neoliberal society is to demonstrate how important this discipline is concerning social and political issues. Because I would say historical musicology is a luxury for our society, but we can, I would say, we can contribute to the solution of a lot of problems in our society. We are trying to work, for example, with migrants, with refugees, and we are trying to work with autist people, for example, and we are working also with different social groups and can contribute to new politics for integration of minorities or foreign people. I think the future of ethnomusicology is in the politics, to be politicized as discipline.
And as a follow-up question to that, then, Professor Mendívil, do today the forces, the conservative forces, the populist forces in politics, like Donald Trump, are they correct then to see academia as an enemy?
Maybe. In a way, yes. I would say in a way, yes. But conservative forces, there is a lot of conservative forces in the academia. We don't need Donald Trump for that, you know. I would say there is I try to do a comparison. This is many friends of mine ask me if I have problem with the racist persons in the German-speaking area, and I always answer, no, I don't have time for racists because I am fighting all the time with non-racist persons. You know, the persons in my environment are non-racist, but they are also reproducing racism. And for this reason, I don't have the time to fight against racist, you know. And I would say the same with conservative. So we have a lot of conservative persons in the university in the German-speaking area, and we don't, and we have to concentrate at the moment on these conservative tendencies in the Austrian university, and then could be able to respond to the very conservative parties.
So, Professor Mendívil, tell us, if you would speak to Danielle Brown and Philip Ewell tonight, what would you tell them? As you said, I mean, you have a clear mission, a clear academic mission of diversity, of inclusivity, bringing new viewpoints to the table to inform people of new information. What would you tell them? So Danielle Brown, she left her career. Philip Ewell, he sounds desperate. He sounds like that he's one person out of in a sea of people who don't even recognize him. How do you respond to this? You are, like you said, the chair of one of the most renowned universities for musicology in the world. And you are exactly, it seems to be in pole position to be a standard bearer.
The first thing I would say is thank you to them, because to Danielle Brown, thank you for the work she has done. And I think it is a pity that she gave up. I think it is a loss for our discipline. And in the case of Ewell, I would say also thanks to him, and also thanks for the excellent work he's doing, and for the bravery he shows in doing that, what he's doing. I think it is very important to confront racist structures like he's doing at the moment. I think it is for me, it's an inspiration, very important inspiration, and I think we need more people like him, as well, like more people like Danielle Brown, and for this reason, it's a pity that she gave up. And I hope that this case help us to reflect about exclusions mechanism in our discipline, and help us to find a way to avoid new Danielle Browns in the future.
Professor Mendívil, what does the future look like to you? So we've had, I believe now you're in your third or fourth year as chair of ethnomusicology. What does the future look like to you, and what can we be excited about to learn in the near future?
In the near future, I will drink a wine here tonight, but in a long perspective, I'm concentrated in music from the Andes again. I'm working on music and sexual and racial violence, and I'm trying to discover new fields for me, and new topics for my students. And yeah, I would say we remain here in Vienna. Vienna is a wonderful city, and I feel really comfortable here with the environment, with the cultural environment, also with the Peruvian or Latin American community. I play music here in Vienna, and I have a good musicians community. I feel very happy, and for this reason, I would say I remain here and do my work and try to fight against racism in my environment, in my department, in my university, and in this society in which I live.
What a powerful statement. How can we stay in touch with you, Professor Mendívil? Here is your website from the university. If somebody needs to reach out to you, they can write to you there at julio.mendívil.
Of course. I will be very happy to keep in touch with colleagues and interesting persons.
Fantastic. So I will put that right now in the chat room so people can reach out to Professor Mendívil. So thank you very much for such an inspiring conversation and enlightening conversation about your work and your research, Professor Julio Mendívil.
Thank you very much for the invitation, and thank you very much for sharing the time with me.
So let's take a look at what's coming up next Wednesday. Rundfunkchor Berlin, The World to Come. A professional radio choir might seem like a performing arts organization far removed from daily reality. Not so. Rundfunkchor Berlin has been at the forefront of every major development in modern Germany's history. Among the first choirs heard in family living rooms, Rundfunkchor Berlin premiered Kurt Weill's music during the progressive interwar years and surely fought bitter cultural wars against the ascendant National Socialists until the choir was renamed Reichssenders Berlin in 1933. In a sadly walled city, the radio choir sang the premieres of Shostakovich's Babi Yar Symphony and Prokofiev's Ivan the Terrible. Then, as the city reconciled the First and Second Worlds, the radio choir premiered music by Pierre Boulez, Michael Tippett, Hans Werner Henze, György Kortag, and Xiao Zhang-Hu. So, it should surprise no one that the Rundfunkchor Berlin would, quote unquote, broaden choir music by creating a so-called concert installation, an interactive live concert museum tour to explore the future with invited guests, world-class musicians from different genres such as Moor Mother, Mohammad Reza Mortazavi, Planning to Rock, Colin Self, and Birke Bertelsmeyer. Come welcome Rundfunkchor Berlin and Tilman Hecker, the concert installation's creator, as well as composer Birke Bertelsmeyer, together with music director Gijs Leernaars, to our show for a socially distanced walk through our shared human experience. As always, all information about upcoming shows may be found at www.simeonmoro.com. It should be noted for our participants, in the United States, that exceptionally next Wednesday will be from 2 to 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Once again, thank you so very much to Professor Julio Mendívil. Thank you to Professor Lino Rivera. Thank you to Agnieszka Rivolet for her support of this show. Most of all, thanks to you, our participants, without whom none of this would be possible. From Vienna, Austria, and the Bay Area, California, goodbye, and see you next Wednesday.
Goodbye.